There is a part of history that hides behind the roar of cannons and the flutter of black flags. A place where the sea was not blue, but red. A place where the legends you grew up hearing were lies, and the truth buried underwater was far darker, far more brutal, and far more terrifying than anything Hollywood ever dared to show. For centuries, people have worshipped pirates as rebellious heroes, free spirits, outlaws with charm and humor. But if you step closer, you look beneath the romantic smoke of rum, treasure maps, and adventurer will discover the unspeakable truth. The golden age of piracy was built on the suffering of women, women whose names vanished, women whose bones lie beneath Caribbean waves, women whose stories were erased because they threatened the fantasy the world wanted to believe. Tonight, you will hear their real story, and once you hear it, you will never look at a pirate the same way again. The myth of the pirate and the reality behind it. When most people imagine pirates, they picture swaggering men with clever mischief in their eyes and hearts that secretly beat with honor. But the Caribbean of the 1600s and early 1700s was not a playground of charming rogues. It was a lawless vacuum where the only rule was violence, and where the least protected people on earth were women. European courts, colonial officials, and even later historians helped create the heroic pirate myth. It was clean. It was entertaining. It sold books. But truth does not sell. Pain does not sell. And so the real testimonies, the women's testimonies, were buried. The reality was this: a pirate ship was one of the most dangerous places any woman could ever be taken. Capture at SEA, the moment terror, BGA, and women rarely traveled on ships in this era. Those who did were in protected environments, wealthy passengers, merchant families, missionaries, or enslaved African and indigenous women being transported across colonies. When pirates targeted a vessel, they did not approach quietly. They fired muskets into the air to terrify the crew. They screamed threats meant to freeze the hearts of those on board. And as they swung aboard, they shouted crude jokes about what they planned to do once they found women on the ship. Caribbean governments knew this. Captains' logs knew this. But instead of protecting women, a silent agreement formed. If women were captured by pirates, anything that happened to them did not count, because pirates were beyond the reach of law. That silence became the shield under which pirates committed horrors, the boarding, chaos, fear, and total POWR when pirates overran a ship. The atmosphere changed instantly. Weapons everywhere. Men screaming. Blood on the deck. The defeated crew forced to kneel. Women were pulled aside immediately. Their luggage searched. Their clothes inspected. Their bodies handled like loot. Many survivors described the same thing. Pirates acted as if women were not people, but spoils of war. Some captains tried to maintain order, but discipline evaporated quickly in the frenzy of victory. For the crew, this was their moment of absolute power, and they used it without restraint. The four fates that waited for women. 1. Sexual violence. This was not incidental. It was systematic. It was expected. It was considered a form of celebration. Accounts from trial records, naval interrogations, and private diaries describe horrific patterns. Women assaulted in groups, threats with pistols and knives. Captains unable or unwilling to stop crew members, men justifying their actions as custom. Some pirates even created lotteries, drawing lots to decide which man would get which captive. History books often skip these details, but the women did not forget them. Many were so traumatized that they refused to testify afterwards, or died before they ever reached land again too. Enslavement and trafficking. If a woman survived the initial assault, she could still be taken as property. Pirates did not always keep captives. More often, they sold them. In places like Tortuga, Port Royal, Nassau, Cartagena, women were traded like merchandise. European, African, indigenous, it did not matter. A young woman could be sold to plantation owners, brothels, ship captains, or criminal networks. Some were transported across entire oceans, far from their homes. The pirates earned money. The woman lost everything: her identity, her language, her body, her life. 3. Marooning, the island of no return. One of the darkest fates was marooning, being abandoned on a tiny, empty island with no tools, no shelter, and no hope. Pirates used this method when a woman resisted. A woman knew too much, the crew argued over her, or she was seen as a liability. These islands were death sentences. Some were no bigger than a few palm trees. Others swarmed with biting insects or had no fresh water. Survivors who were found alive described months of starvation, drinking rainwater, hiding from storms, trying to fish with their bare hands, carving messages onto driftwood, praying for a ship that never came. Some were found so traumatized they could barely speak. Others were found only as bones. Marooning was a quiet execution, one that left no witness alive. 4. Murder. When pirates wanted no trace, they killed quickly, coldly, without guilt. Some women were stabbed or shot. Others were drowned. Some were thrown overboard for entertainment. A few were executed simply to prevent them from identifying the pirates. Later, death was often considered the kindest outcome because those who lived faced far worse. The pirate wife, a lie that hid real cases. A pirate claimed a woman as a wife. Some historians romanticize these stories, but the reality was grim. She did not choose, she could not refuse. She could not escape. Pirate marriage was slavery with a sentimental mask. If the pirate died, she became ship property again. If the crew mutinied, she might be assaulted by everyone. If she became pregnant, she was often abandoned at the next port because a child was inconvenient. Nothing about this arrangement resembled marriage. It was control. It was captivity. It was violence presented as affection. Why history kept silent? You may wonder. If all this happened, why isn't it widely known? 3 reasons shaped the silence. 1. Colonial governments didn't care. Women, especially poor, enslaved or indigenous women, were not considered reliable witnesses. Their trauma was seen as unimportant compared to piracy's economic impact. Point 2. Survivors rarely spoke. Rape in this era was treated with shame, not justice. Many women hid what happened. Others died before reaching a safe port. 3. The pirate myth was profitable. Writers, painters, and later filmmakers sanitized pirates into playful outlaws. A dark truth was replaced with a marketable lie, and for centuries, the world preferred the lie. The ghosts of the curb, BA and today, thousands of shipwrecks lie at the bottom of the Caribbean Sea. Many are unmarked graves, not just for sailors, but for women whose stories were stolen. Their names are gone. Their lives are forgotten. Their suffering erased, but their truth still lingers in court records, in sailors' journals, in whispered accounts from survivors who dared to speak, and that truth destroys the legend. The golden age of piracy was built on the pain of women. In part 2, we will go deeper into the first-hand accounts, the confessions, the trial testimonies, the women who survived and the ones who didn't. You will hear the stories the world spent centuries hiding, and once you hear them, there is no going back. They called it the golden age of piracy. But for the women who crossed paths with pirates, it was an age without mercy, an era where the ocean became a graveyard of unspoken crimes, erased identities, and broken lives. What follows is the part of pirate history that storytellers refused to tell, the part that governments ignored, the part that survivors could not speak about. This is the history of women in the shadow of piracy, not the legends, but the brutal truth. Chapter 6. What happened after capture when pirates seized a merchant ship? The men were dealt with first. Some were forced into labor, others ransomed, and many simply killed to prevent resistance. But the women, their fate depended on the mood of the crew, the desperation of the voyage, and the chaos that followed an attack. There were 5 primary outcomes, each as bleak as the last. 1. The spoils of war. Pirates operated under a violent moral code in which anything captured was considered communal property. Gold, rum, weapons, silk, and women. If a woman was young, healthy, or simply unlucky, she was dragged to the lower deck and subjected to collective assault. This was not an act of passion, nor chaos, it was institutionalized violence. Many pirate codes, while forbidding harm to their own crew, allowed unrestricted brutality toward captives. Surgeons on board recorded horrifying injuries, broken ribs, internal bleeding, severe infections, and in many cases, death within days. What is most haunting is that these acts were not committed by isolated monsters, were normalized across entire crews. 2. Commodities. For trade, women were often treated as currency. Pirates traded them for gunpowder, medical supplies, fresh water, navigation tools, safe anchorage, political favors in some pirate ports. Tortuga, New Providence, Madagascar. Women were displayed in the open like livestock. Colonial records describe women being exchanged for a handful of bullets or a keg of rum. For many, captivity became a long chain of ownership. One ship to another, one port to another, one pirate to another. Each transfer stripped away more of their identity. 3. The Islands of No Return. There is a term rarely mentioned in sanitized pirate tales. Marooning. Marooning was not exile. It was execution disguised as mercy. If a crew feared that a woman might testify against them, if she resisted, if she was injured, or if the pirates simply grew tired of her, they rowed her to an uninhabited island and abandoned her with no fresh water, no shelter, no way to escape, and no hope of rescues. Some women survived only a few days. Others lasted weeks. A handful endured months. Starvation, heat, or storms claimed them. Occasionally, passing ships found survivors, women, half mad from isolation, who could no longer speak their names. Most were never found at all, for forced marriages. A small number of women were kept as what pirates called wives. This term was a lie. It masked a system of long-term captivity. A pirate wife was confined to the captain's cabin, assaulted regularly, prevented from leaving the vessel, forced to obey at all times if the pirate died in a battle. Mutiny or storm, the woman did not gain freedom. She simply became the next victim of the crew, or was killed to erase evidence. One Caribbean court document describes a woman who had been married to 3 different pirates in 1 year each. Man killed by the next dot. These were not marriages. They were ongoing crimes wrapped in a distorted imitation of domestic life. 5. Execution 2. Erase evidence. The darkest fate was also the simplest. If the pirates wanted no witnesses, they killed the women outright. Some were stabbed, some shot, some thrown overboard with rocks tied to their ankles. Others were drowned slowly, forced off the edge of the ship while the crew laughed. The cruelty was not functional, it was theatrical, a twisted performance meant to display dominance. One witness testimony from 1708 recorded a pirate captain as saying, "No tale is told by a woman at the bottom of the sea." Chapter 7. The psychological terror. Survivors who reached shore faced a different kind of torment. Colonial courts often dismissed their accounts, claiming women exaggerated or misunderstood pirate behavior. Priests urged them to remain silent to preserve their modesty. Families, fearing social stigma, forbade them from speaking about what happened. Thus, women endured a double trauma. 1. The violence at sea. 2. The silence imposed on land many lived with. Chronic nightmares, inability to trust men, lifelong physical pain, depression, and isolation. Fear of the ocean, even from a distance. Few took their own lives. Others changed their names and disappeared into new cities. History rarely recorded their suffering. It recorded only the names of the pirates. Chapter 8. Why this history was erased for centuries. The story of women in pirate history was intentionally hidden. There were 3 main reasons. 1. Colonial governments wanted simple narratives. Pirates were depicted as rebels or criminals, nothing more. Their crimes against women complicated diplomatic efforts and threatened trade relations, so officials minimized these accounts. Reports were edited, testimonies were discarded, victims were ignored. 2. Pirate lore needed hero storytellers, especially 19th century writers preferred romantic tales, treasure hunts, daring escapes, charming rogues' adventures under the moonlight. Women being tortured and killed did not fit the fantasy, so the cruelty was removed, and the pirates became larger-than-life figures. 3. Women did not have the means to record their truth. Most victims were poor, enslaved, colonial laborers, indigenous, or migrants with no legal protection. Their voices were fragile, and the world did not listen, so the silence lasted generations. Chapter 9. The 2 female pirates who broke the pattern. There were only 2 women in the Golden Age who willingly became pirates. Anne Bonny, Mary Read. Both disguised themselves as men at sea. Both fought violently in battle. Both refused to be victims, but their legendary stories mislead us. Their lives were exceptions, extremely rare, and surrounded by myth. Tens of thousands of other women had no such power. Chapter 10. The Forgotten Vessels. Archaeological research has uncovered chilling evidence on multiple shipwrecks, including wrecks near Jamaica, Florida, and the Bahamas. Divers found women's jewelry scattered among pirate weapons, fragments of women's clothing, bone remains showing trauma bindings, shackles, and restraints, charred areas suggesting burnings or punishments. These artifacts create a silent but undeniable narrative. Women were present on pirate ships far more often than the stories suggest. and not as passengers. The ocean bed is full of truths that no historian wrote down. Chapter 11. The Cost of Survival. Few women who escaped lived with lifelong consequences. Some hid their stories until death, writing confessions in journals discovered centuries later. Some faced aggressive questioning from male officials who doubted every detail. Others were forced into marriages to restore their respectability. Across cultures, one theme repeats: survival did not bring peace. The sea took more than their safety. It took parts of their identity that could never be restored. Chapter 12. The Legacy. We must confront the modern image of pirate side-patches, jokes, rum, charms of fabrication. The real pirates were traffickers, killers, rapists, human tormentors, destroyers of families. Their victims, especially women, deserve remembrance. They were mothers, daughters, merchants, servants, travelers, enslaved girls, each with a life interrupted, transformed or destroyed. We say pirates lived freely, but their freedom was built on the suffering of the powerless. History celebrates the outlaws, but justice demands we remember the victims too. Final message. Documentary narration style. The golden age of piracy is not the story of daring adventures or rebellious heroes. It is a story soaked in fear, cruelty, and human tragedy. Behind every pirate flag fluttering in the Caribbean wind, there were screams that no one wrote down. Behind every plundered ship, there were women whose names the sea swallowed. This documentary does not seek to glorify pirates. It seeks to give voice at last to the forgotten ones. Their stories were silenced, but now you have heard them, and their truth will no longer be lost to the waves.